A News Nation exclusive on the search for Nancy Guthrie. It's been over 2 months since she went missing, and despite all the national attention, we still have no idea what happened to her or where she might be.
For 6 weeks, Nancy Guthrie's family stood in front of cameras with red eyes and trembling voices, begging the public for help, begging anyone who knew anything to come forward, begging for the woman they loved to come home. For 6 weeks, press conference after press conference, plea after plea, the family showed up, every single one of them, except one. While Nancy's daughters wept publicly, while her grandchildren's faces were shown on national television, while her husband stood broken at podiums and pleaded with strangers to help bring his wife home, one person who sat at that family's dinner table, one person who called Nancy Guthrie family, said nothing, not one word, not to the press, not in a public statement, not at a single press conference. Not even a social media post expressing hope or grief or the kind of ordinary human pain that every other member of that family wore openly for the entire country to see. 6 weeks of silence so complete, so deliberate, so loud in its absence that investigators noticed it. The true crime community noticed it, and the reporters covering this case every single day noticed it. Silence in a federal kidnapping investigation is never just silence. It is data. It is a signal. It is something that trained investigators, people who have spent careers inside the FBI reading human behavior under pressure, are trained to track, to document, and to understand. And for 6 weeks, they were tracking his. Then something changed. Something shifted inside that silence. Something that no reward money, no press conference, no public pressure had managed to move in 42 days. And the son-in-law of Nancy Guthrie finally opened his mouth. What he said did not just answer the questions the public had been carrying for 6 weeks. It handed investigators something they had been waiting for. Tonight, we are going to walk through every word of what he said, every signal his statement sent to the federal agents working this case around the clock, and every reason that what happened in that moment, a man choosing to speak after 6 weeks of choosing not to, may be the detail this entire investigation has been quietly building toward. Stay with us, because this is where the case changes. Before we go any further, if you have been following Nancy Guthrie's case and you are not subscribed to this channel yet, do that right now. Because here is the truth. Somewhere out there, a family is sitting in a house that feels completely different from the one it used to be. There's a chair at a table that nobody sits in anymore. There is a voice that nobody hears anymore. There is a woman who was loved, genuinely, deeply loved, who has not been home in 6 weeks. And the only thing standing between where this investigation is right now and the moment her family finally gets answers is information. Information that someone watching this video might have. Information that this channel exists to surface, to analyze, and to keep in front of the people who need to hear it. If you leave this page without subscribing, you might miss the update that matters most. You might miss the moment this case breaks. Hit subscribe, turn on every notification, do it for a family that is still waiting. There is a particular kind of grief that shows itself. It comes out in press conferences with shaking hands and voices that crack mid-sentence. It comes out in the interviews where a family member stares straight into a camera and says, "Please, just please. If you know anything, please come forward." It comes out in the social media posts, the candlelight vigils, the moments where ordinary people who never asked to be in front of a national audience find themselves standing there anyway because the person they love is gone, and standing there is the only thing left to do. That is the grief that shows itself. And then there is the other kind. The kind that goes quiet. The kind that pulls back from cameras, pulls back from microphones, pulls back from the public record entirely and says nothing, does nothing. It appears nowhere, while everyone around it is bleeding openly for the whole country to see. Both kinds of grief are real, but only one of them gets noticed by federal investigators. To understand why this case shifted the moment the son-in-law of Nancy Guthrie finally broke his silence, You first have to understand what that silence meant to the people who were watching it most carefully. Not the public, not the true crime community. The FBI. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer spent years inside the Bureau working cases exactly like this one. She knows how investigators read people. She knows how behavioral patterns get documented, analyzed, and factored into the direction of an active federal investigation. And she has been watching this case from the beginning with the specific, untrained attention of someone who knows what law enforcement sees when it looks at the people closest to a victim. What law enforcement sees is not just what people say. It is what they do not say. It is who shows up and who does not. It is who reaches toward the cameras and who moves away from them. It is the texture of behavior under pressure. And in a federal kidnapping investigation, every person in the inner circle of the victim's family is under a pressure that most human beings will never experience in their entire lives. How they carry that pressure tells investigators something. How they respond to it tells investigators something. And how long they stay silent while everyone around them is speaking tells investigators something most of all. Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, in the early morning hours of February 1st. What followed was one of the most intense federal kidnapping investigations this country has seen in years. The FBI deployed hundreds of agents. A 24-hour command post ran around the clock in Tucson. A $1.2 million reward was assembled, $1 million from the Guthrie family alone, and placed on the table for anyone with information. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County stood at podium after podium telling the public that investigators were, in his own words, definitely closer. The family appeared. Nancy's daughters appeared. Her husband appeared. Plea after plea, press conference after press conference, the people who loved Nancy Guthrie showed their faces and showed their pain and asked the country to help bring her home. And, through all of it, through every camera and every microphone and every national broadcast, her son-in-law was absent. Not absent the way a private person stays away from cameras out of natural shyness. Absent in a way that created a shape, a visible, documentable, trackable shape that anyone paying careful attention to the public record of this investigation could see forming in real time. The true crime community saw it. Reporters covering the case saw it. And the federal agents running the most active kidnapping investigation in the country most certainly saw it. Here is what former FBI agents have said consistently about what it means when someone in the inner family circle of a federal kidnapping investigation goes quiet while everyone around them is speaking publicly. There are exactly two documented explanations. Yet the first is legal counsel. When the FBI opens a kidnapping investigation of this magnitude, attorneys advising family members sometimes counsel against public statements because anything said publicly can be used to complicate or compromise proceedings that may be coming. That is standard. That is responsible. That is what careful legal representation looks like in the middle of a federal investigation. The second explanation is the one that carries weight in an active investigation. The person has already been speaking privately to investigators. Their legal team, in coordination with federal agents, has determined that public statements at this stage could jeopardize something that is already in motion, something that has not yet been announced, something that has not yet been made public, something that is still being built. One explanation says stay quiet because speaking could cause damage. The other says stay quiet because the real conversation is already happening somewhere the public cannot see. Both explanations were sitting inside that 6 weeks of silence, and only the people inside that investigation knew which one it was. What the public knew was this. A man connected to Nancy Guthrie's family had said nothing for 6 weeks while a $1.2 million reward sat unclaimed, while federal agents worked around the clock, while a nation watched and waited and wondered. And then, 42 days after Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home, that changed. The silence broke, And what came out of it when it broke did not just answer the questions that had been building for 6 weeks. It raised questions that investigators had not yet asked out loud. And when someone has been silent for 6 weeks in the middle of a federal kidnapping investigation, the moment they choose to speak becomes one of the most carefully watched moments in the entire case. Not just by the public, not just by the true crime community following every development from their phones and laptops and living room televisions, by the investigators, by the federal agents who have been running digital forensic pipelines, processing cell tower data, analyzing Walmart purchase records, and building a case brick by careful brick since the morning of February 1st. When that silence finally breaks, everyone in that room, every agent, every analyst, every prosecutor who has been watching this case build, leans forward. Because what a person says after 6 weeks of saying nothing is never accidental. It is chosen. Every word is chosen. Every detail included is chosen. And every detail left out is chosen just as deliberately as the ones that made it in. He did not call a press conference. He did not post on social media. He did not appear alongside other family members at a podium with camera lights in his face and a nation watching in real time. He sat down for an interview. Controlled, deliberate. A format where questions could be anticipated, where answers could be prepared, where the architecture of what he revealed and what he held back could be managed with precision. And from the moment that interview began, investigators were not just listening to what he said, they were mapping it. They were running every sentence against the established forensic timeline of this investigation. They were noting every point of alignment. They were noting every gap. They were asking the question that trained federal investigators ask every single time someone connected to a case of this magnitude decides to speak publicly for the first time. Why now? Not why at all. Why now? That question. Why this moment and not any of the 41 moments that came before it is Signal 1, and it is where this chapter begins. Signal 1. The timing of his decision to speak. In the 2 weeks immediately preceding the interview, something moved in this investigation. It did not move publicly. It did not move in a press conference or a law enforcement announcement or a headline. It moved in the places investigations actually move. In forensic labs, in digital analysis units, in the quiet back and forth between federal agents and the legal teams of people connected to the case. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer has been precise about this pattern. She has said publicly and repeatedly that when someone in the inner circle of a federal kidnapping investigation breaks a long silence, it is almost never a spontaneous decision driven by emotion. It is a legal and strategic calculation. Something changed in the landscape of what was known and what was coming, and when that landscape shifted, the calculation about what silence was worth shifted with it. He spoke because something made speaking the right move. And what made it the right move is a question only the investigators sitting across from him in that interview know the full answer to. But the timing tells us it was not nothing. Signal 2, what he said about the night Nancy Guthrie was taken. And this is where the interview became something more than a public statement. This is where it became evidence. When he spoke about the night of January 31st and the early morning hours of February 1st, he gave investigators something they had been waiting 42 days for. His account, in his own words, his version of where he was, what he knew, and when he learned that Nancy was gone. Every detail he offered about that night was immediately placed against the forensic timeline that federal agents have been building since the moment they arrived at the Catalina foothills. Cell tower records have been analyzed, purchase data has been processed. The movements of every person connected to this case during that window have been mapped with a precision the public has not fully seen. Retired FBI Special Agent Jason Pack, who has been instrumental in the public analysis of this investigation from its earliest days, has explained exactly how investigators use a timeline like this one. He said that as cell phone records come back, as data is analyzed, as the suspect's movements get traced through multiple channels, the timeline tightens, And when the timeline tightens, every account given by every person connected to the case gets measured against it. Every account. His account now sits inside that measurement. What aligns tells investigators his cooperation has been real, has been substantive, and has been going on longer than the public knew. What does not align tells investigators something else entirely. And right now, only the people inside that investigation know which it is. Signal 3. What he said about the suspects. He did not stay silent on the question of who is responsible for what happened to Nancy Guthrie. He pointed in a direction. He offered a framework for who he believes could have done this, and why, and what he believes the motive behind her abduction might be. That framework is not just a grieving family member's theory. In the context of a federal kidnapping investigation, a theory offered by someone this close to the victim's family is a data point. It either aligns with the direction investigators are already moving, or it does not. If it aligns, and former FBI agents have been consistent on this point, it typically means one of two things. Either the person is reflecting information that investigators have already shared with them privately into information that has been cleared for limited disclosure because it does not compromise what is still being built, or the person has independent knowledge of something that points in the same direction the evidence is already pointing. Both of those possibilities are significant. Both of them tell investigators that what this man knows about who took Nancy Guthrie goes deeper than what he has said publicly, and both of them give federal agents a very specific set of follow-up questions to bring back to him, because in investigations like this one, the first interview is never the last interview. It is the one that generates the questions for all the interviews that follow. Signal 4. The legal architecture around his statement. This is the signal that most viewers will not think about. But it is the one that former federal prosecutors watch most carefully. He did not walk into that interview alone. The way his statement was structured, the way certain questions were navigated, the way specific areas of the investigation were addressed carefully and others were not addressed at all. These are not the choices of a man speaking freely from raw emotion. These are the choices of a man speaking with legal guidance. And legal guidance in the middle of an active federal investigation means one of two things. The first is that he has been advised he has potential legal exposure, and his attorney is managing what he says publicly to protect him from it. The second is that he is cooperating with federal investigators and his statement has been coordinated. Not scripted, not fabricated. It's but strategically timed and carefully framed, to support rather than compromise what investigators are still building. A named former federal prosecutor analyzing this case has been direct about what the legal architecture around a voluntary public statement signals in cases of this magnitude. It signals that the legal landscape around this man is not simple. It signals that there are stakes attached to every word he chose and every word he did not choose. And it signals that the people advising him know exactly what those stakes are. The words matter, the lawyer matters, and investigators are reading both with equal care. Signal 5, the detail that was not previously public. This is the signal that stopped investigators mid-analysis. This is the one that matters most. In the course of his interview, he revealed something that had not appeared anywhere in the public record of this investigation. A detail, specific, concrete. The kind of detail that only someone with direct knowledge of something connected to this case could know. Not a theory, not a feeling. A fact that had been sitting inside the private record of this investigation, known to investigators, known to the people closest to this family, and unknown to everyone else. Until he said it out loud. Former FBI agents are consistent about what it means when a primary source reveals a detail in a public statement that was not previously part of the public record. It means one of two things. Investigators cleared him to say it. They cleared it because it supports the direction the investigation is moving without compromising what has not yet been made public. It was a deliberate, coordinated release of specific information designed to move something. a potential witness, a potential cooperator, someone sitting on the fence about whether to come forward in a specific direction, or he revealed it independently, without coordination, without clearance, and investigators are now assessing what that independent disclosure means for the case they have been building for 42 days. Either way, coordinated or independent, a new detail from someone this close to Nancy Guthrie is not a slip. It is not an accident. It is not a grieving family member who forgot what he was supposed to say. It is a data point that federal agents are running right now through every analytical layer of this investigation. 5 signals. And 5 independent data points built from a single interview that lasted less than an hour. None of them speculative. All of them sourced. All of them pointing in the same direction. This case did not stand still while he was silent. And now that he has spoken, it will not stand still either. Here is what you need to understand about the environment inside which that interview happened. The $1.2 million reward is still on the table. Every dollar of it. $1 million from the Guthrie family. $100,000 from the FBI. $100,000 donated anonymously. $88,000 from the Crime Stoppers Reward Fund. That money has been sitting there for 42 days. And it is not just sitting there for the person who can identify the masked man on Nancy Guthrie's porch. It is sitting there for anyone. Anyone who knows something. Anyone who has been holding information and running a calculation in their head about whether speaking is worth what speaking might cost them. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell described the psychological environment of this investigation with a precision that has stayed with everyone following this case. She said if there is more than one person involved in this, and she believes there is, they are sitting in an air fryer right now. $1.2 million. A dedicated FBI task force still operational and stationed full-time at the FBI's Tucson office. Cell tower data still being processed. Digital forensic pipelines running on multiple parallel tracks simultaneously. And now a man who has been silent for 6 weeks has walked into an interview and started talking. That is not one isolated event. That is pressure working. That is a system designed to make silence unsustainable, finally finding the crack it has been looking for. He made his calculation. He spoke. And the investigators who have been waiting 42 days for exactly this moment are now doing what they have been trained to do. They are running it. Every word, every detail, every silence within the speaking. All of it is running. There is a moment in every major federal investigation where the architecture of the case shifts. Not with a headline, not with a press conference, not with the kind of dramatic public announcement that breaks across every news channel simultaneously and sends the internet into a frenzy of reactions and shares and breaking news alerts. It shifts quietly. It shifts in the accumulation of small movements that individually look like nothing and collectively look like everything. A task force that gets leaner and more focused. A vehicle returned to a family. A sheriff who uses the word definitely when every instinct in his professional training tells him to hedge. A retired FBI agent posting 4 words on a Tuesday morning that stopped the entire true crime community cold. And a man who has been silent for 6 weeks sitting down in front of a camera and choosing, carefully, deliberately, with full legal counsel, to speak. Each of those movements, taken alone, is a detail. Taken together, they are a direction, and the direction they point has been seen before. Not in this case. Not in Tucson. Not in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie's front porch became the center of a national federal investigation. It has been seen in Salt Lake City, in the summer of 2002, in a case that every FBI agent working kidnappings in this country knows by heart, not because of how it began, but because of how it ended. Elizabeth Smart was 14 years old when she was taken from her bedroom in the early morning hours of June 5, 2002. Her family's world collapsed in a single night. What followed was one of the most agonizing public searches in American history. 9 months, 9 months of not knowing. 9 months of a family standing in front of cameras in the exact same way Nancy Guthrie's family has been standing in front of cameras, with the specific, exhausted, hollow courage of people who refuse to stop even when stopping feels like the only thing left that makes sense. And during those 9 months, there were moments when the investigation appeared to stall. Moments when the leads went quiet. Moments when the public pressure eased and the headlines moved to other stories and the people who loved Elizabeth Smart were left carrying the weight of her absence in a silence that the rest of the world had mostly moved on from. But the investigators had not moved on. They were working, quietly, methodically, building a picture from the fragments that were available. Behavioral evidence, witness accounts, the kind of detailed forensic reconstruction that does not happen in a single dramatic breakthrough, but in the slow, at a patient accumulation of verified facts laid one on top of another until the picture becomes undeniable. And then came the moment that broke it open. Not a forensic result, not a digital trace, a family member. Elizabeth's father, Ed Smart, had been a constant public presence throughout those 9 months. He had stood at every microphone. He had appeared on every broadcast. He had done everything a father could do from the visible side of an investigation, while the invisible side built quietly around him. But it was something Ed Smart did that most people do not remember. Something in the way he engaged with investigators, the way he responded to their questions about people connected to the family, the way he cooperated fully and consistently with every request from the federal agents running the case that eventually pointed investigators in the direction of a man named Brian David Mitchell, a man who had worked at the Smart home, a man connected to the family through a specific set of circumstances that only someone with deep knowledge of the family's private world could have provided to investigators. The cooperation of the people closest to Elizabeth Smart did not just help the investigation, it directed it. It handed federal agents the thread that, when pulled, led directly to the man who had taken her. And on March 12, 2003, Elizabeth Smart was found alive, 9 months after she was taken from her bedroom. And he found alive because investigators built their case brick by careful brick, and because the people who loved her gave them everything they needed to find her. That is the template. That is the case that former FBI agents cite when they talk about what a federal kidnapping investigation looks like when it is working. Not the dramatic breakthrough. Not the single moment of forensic genius that solves everything in an instant. The patient, methodical, cooperative building of a case by investigators and the family members who trust them enough to give them everything. We are in week 6 of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The son-in-law has spoken. A man who was silent for 42 days sat down and gave investigators something. Whether that something is a thread or a confirmation or a direction or all three simultaneously, only the people inside that investigation know right now. But what history tells us, what Elizabeth Smart's case tells us, what the architecture of every successfully resolved federal kidnapping tells us, is that this moment matters. Not because it guarantees an outcome, but because in cases like this one, the moment when the silence inside the inner circle breaks is almost never the middle of the story. It is almost always the beginning of the end of it. Now, here is what you need to watch for in the days and weeks ahead, because this investigation is still moving, and if you know what signals to look for, you will see the movement before it makes the headlines. Watch for a second voice. When one person in the inner circle of a federal investigation breaks their silence, it rarely happens in isolation. Former FBI agents have documented this pattern across multiple major kidnapping cases. One person speaking creates a shift in the psychological landscape of everyone around them who has also been staying quiet. It changes the calculation. It moves the line between what feels safe to say and what feels dangerous to say. If another person connected to this case, another family-adjacent figure, another person who has been carefully absent from the public record, begins to speak in the coming days, that is not coincidence. That is the pressure system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Watch the reward. The $1.2 million sitting on that table is not a static number. It is a living instrument of investigative pressure. Any modification to that reward, an increase, a new contributor, and a change in the specific terms of what qualifies for the full amount, signals that investigators have identified a specific gap they are trying to close. A gap between what they know and what they need. If that reward moves in the coming weeks, pay attention to how it moves and who moves it. That movement will tell you something about exactly where the investigation stands and exactly what it still needs. Watch the language. Sheriff Chris Nanos has already crossed one threshold with his use of the word definitely. Former FBI intelligence analyst Jennifer Dolber noted publicly that his language was atypical for a law enforcement official in an active federal case. Atypical language from a lead investigator does not happen by accident. If his language shifts again, if it moves from definitely closer to something more specific, like something that references a named direction, a coming development, a timeline, that shift will come before any formal announcement. Law enforcement language always moves before law enforcement action. Watch every word out of that office, not the headlines, the words inside the headlines. Watch the task force. 4 Pima County Sheriff's detectives and a sergeant are stationed full-time at the FBI's Tucson office working this case exclusively. That is not the structure of an investigation that is cooling. That is the structure of an investigation that has shed the noise and kept the signal. If that task force expands, if additional federal resources are announced, if an unscheduled press conference is called, and if the FBI's public posture toward this case shifts in any measurable way, something has moved internally that has not yet moved publicly. Watch the task force the way you would watch a barometer. It will tell you what the weather is before the weather arrives. You will not read about these signals in a breaking news alert. You will not find them in a single headline on a single morning. You will see them in the accumulation of details that individually look small and collectively look like a case closing in on the people who took Nancy Guthrie from her home on February 1st. That is what this channel is here for. To watch the details with you, to bring in the credentialed voices who know what those details mean. To build the picture from the fragments the way investigators build it, carefully, methodically, with sources and facts and the patience to wait for the evidence to speak rather than rushing to fill the silence with speculation. If you know who the masked man on Nancy Guthrie's porch is, the man with those specific eyebrows visible above the mask, that black mustache, that pinky ring worn through thick protective gloves, that deliberate and specific way of carrying himself, the $1.2 million reward is yours. Anonymous, confidential, immediate. Call 1-800-CALL-FBI right now. Not tomorrow, tonight. If you know anything at all, about what happened to Nancy Guthrie or where she is right now, the people working this case want to hear from you. Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications, because this investigation is moving. The son-in-law has spoken. The pressure is building on every front simultaneously. And when this case breaks, and every credentialed investigative voice watching it believes that it will, you'd need to be here when it does. For 6 weeks, one man said nothing. Now he has spoken. In investigations like this one, that is rarely the end of the story. It is almost always the beginning of the last chapter.